Are you guys okay if Joel records the round?
Yeah, we're fine with it.
Cool.
All right, then, oh, what is this? Okay, cool, no worries. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Ria Jane. I will be the first speaker for the affirmative in today's debate. The resolution is in the chat. I'll say it in the beginning of my speech. Yeah, so pretty simple, just 7 minutes. With that, my time begins now. Renee and I affirm the resolution that this House prefers a post-COVID pandemic world in which most high school parli tournaments are online to a post-COVID pandemic world in which most high school parli tournaments are in person. So the burdens of this round is that we as the affirmative need to win that a post-COVID pandemic world where most of these tournaments are online is better than when they are in person. We define this House as the National Parliamentary Debate League because they're the ones running the tournaments in the first place. And we define this as a value resolution due to the word prefers in the resolution, and we also provide this value to the accessibility to the parliamentary debate space. Why? Because we believe that accessibility is the most important because it is a prerequisite. No one can get fairness and education out of the debate space if they cannot enter the debate space or if they are barred for some reason. Starting with 2 observations. First of all, tournaments are not necessarily equivalent to school debate practices. This means that schools can still hold debate practices online or in person, whether or not the tournaments are online or in person. Second of all, some does not mean all, which means that in either world of the debate, it is not going to be it's not going to be every single tournament that is online or every single tournament that is in person. It is just a question of how many there are. Pretty straightforward. With that being said, does my opponents have any questions about the top of case? No? Cool. Starting with the first contention on the cost factor. Couple subpoints here. The first is
I have a quick question, my bad. What do y'all define post-COVID to mean specifically?
Post-COVID being like whenever the CDC defines the COVID like to not be a big problem anymore. Like it could still exist, but if it's not a big problem. The first contention is the cost factor. So the first point here is the tournament cost. So we can see that it is harder to attend tournaments due to cost for many, many individuals. When tournaments are held in person, the debate team hosting it out has to rent out the school, pay for all the rooms for the entire weekend, which adds onto the cost burden of the tournament, thus making entry costs higher. This has 2 implications. One, this hurts debaters at a socioeconomic disadvantage because they do not have the money to pay the entry fees to go to all these tournaments. This means that attending less tournaments means like in general getting up less TOC points, which means that these socioeconomically disadvantaged debaters have less access to the debate space. Even the fact that we have like a wild card situations does not solve for all these debaters in general because it's only going to solve for some of them, which means we should prioritize helping them. The second point, the second reason, the B sub point, is that this saves the tournament itself costs from having to host this at their school, but they still are able to get money out of this. This means that like even the tournaments still get some money out of the entry costs without having to pay the money or without having to like negotiate with the school in order to rent it out for the entire weekend. This would specifically help small schools. The second subpoint under the cost factor contention is transportation. Debaters often have to drive to and fro tournaments, meaning that they need access to a car, paying for gas, etc. The A is that this also affects the cost factor by disproportionately helping debaters that live nearby. Some debaters won't attend tournaments simply because they're too far. The B is that of East Coast debates. Sometimes for East Coast tournaments, like these East Coast debaters oftentimes need to fly all the way to California just to attend a regular tournament where it costs us almost nothing just to drive 30 minutes away. Especially when East Coast debaters have to do things, just fly to California for like TOC. This means that like why should the people who deserve to attend TOC just as much as we do have to pay an extra $1,000 in flight tickets and hotel tickets just to subsidize this? Because we can assume that this is not going to like be paid for by the NPDL board, as we can like go off of historical precedent. Then obviously it's going to be disproportionately hurting them. The third subpoint is formal wear. We can see that many online tournaments take down the requirement for formal dress, and there's just simply no point. Suits and blazers can be extremely expensive, with some of the cheaper ones costing $100 in itself. Although debaters have to have access to a laptop and Wi-Fi regardless of in-person or online debates, having the reassurance that they don't have to dress up super formally for every single tournament is better for saving money. And additionally, they can also turn their cameras off in some specific instances so they don't have to show if they're wearing formal dress or not. Now, the links. We can see that 1, debaters don't have to pay higher prices for tournaments, so they can go to more tournaments, and 2, they don't have to pay for high-priced things like transport and clothes. The impacts here are accessibility because more people are able to compete in the debate space, and this specifically benefits minorities because only a handful of minority students are on the circuit, and even fewer compete at the TOC level. If we make debaters a more accessible space, more minorities can join. More on this in the second contention. And secondly, education, more real-world skills can be gained when debating is easier for everyone. The second contention is the growth of debate. So we can see that, like, in general, we can see that online debates have allowed for a more of a growth in debate and will continue to do so after the COVID-19 pandemic. The first point here is that this brings in newcomers. Debating online is more attractive to newcomers because it's less of a commitment and makes it easier to join. Thus, the activity can actually grow. Imagine joining debate and having to travel out an hour away to an unfamiliar campus as opposed to just being able to relax in your room and get water anytime. And like having, especially for like ninth grade or like novice debaters who aren't like super comfortable with this stuff, like their parents won't have to like will be able to like help out, watch over them in case and there's any like technical difficulties. Second is comfortability. Because students are no longer to adhere to strict dress codes, it provides more of a comfort. And obviously studies show that operating in a familiar home setting and wearing clothes that people can can contribute to enhanced performance and less stress due to familiarity with the same setting, which creates better mental health and allows for increased performance in the long term. Third is that we can create more tournament entries. In online debate, in in-person debate, tournaments were often forced to cap the number of entries in each activity. This was because of the limited amount of space that they reserved at the tournament's venue. But in our world, debates can be larger and accept more students from each school because they don't have to rent out a number of rooms for the tournament. Obviously, as you know, NSB campus doesn't really have a limit on rooms, and even if it did, it's a very big limit, much more than you would have to have in a regular in-person tournament. The fourth subpoint under where does it go? The fourth subpoint under the growth of debate is equity forums. Now, this is like less about the growth of the debate rather than like keeping people in debate, but rather specifically, let's look at how like in online debate, you don't know if people are going to an equity forum. Let's say there was a really, really abusive opponent one round and they said something like super racist or sexist, and that like somebody wanted to go to report that in an equity forum. They might be scared away from doing that if it was in person because they would like, it's pretty obvious if there's an equity forum room, you go to the equity forum, you report the issue if it's like a big deal. Whereas on online debate, nobody knows that you're going there except you because you are just the one joining the Zoom. This scares debaters away from making complaints and can make the space less accessible to all people, thus pushing the debaters outside of the activity. On to the links. First is that the growth of the debate space overall creates more accessibility as its popularity spotlights its importance. Debate is funded through its education, through its ability to provide education for students. Thus, if we increase the scope of that education, we raise more money to invest in the activity. Second is that funding will make debate even more accessible and enabling tournaments to charge lower entry fees, letting even more students join. And third, we can see that we keep students in the activity due to equity forums like not being super like visible to everybody else in the activity. Onto the impact, we can see that more students will join debate and reap the educational benefits of the activity, such as going to college and having more knowledge overall. And in general, we keep students in debate, which can like help them for their policymaking skills as well as their critical thinking skills. Overall, debate is good. So yeah, because of all these reasons and more, we are proud to affirm.
Awesome. So the order of my speech is just going to be the neg case, the affirmative case. Is everybody good? Awesome. With that, my time may begin now. We negate the resolution that this House prefers a post-COVID pandemic world in which most high school parliamentary tournaments are online to a post-COVID pandemic world in which most high school parliamentary tournaments are in person. Let's move into the definitions. Post-COVID is just once COVID has fully subsided. Both teams agree on this definition. Let's move forward. Our first contention is that of online debate being bad. The first uniqueness argument or just argument in general is going to be that of back files. Subpoint A is that online debate means that it's much easier for teams to use back files or pre-prepped arguments since teams no longer have to write down arguments on paper, but rather just copy paste back files. There are two arguments under this. Even during the round, the back files can be used to refute an opponent's case, which means that the value of any analytical skill being leveraged to win a round goes down and is traded for the speed of someone that can either search up a refutation to any opponent's argument or how many pre-prep responses that they have. Second, this is also a tangible impact in terms of creating inequality between big and small schools, since it widens the gap between the rich and the poor schools, since the bigger teams have more coaches and more people, which means that the quality and quantity of back files also increase, meaning that they're inherently going to win. Second is prep. The argument under this is that this is the second uniqueness argument. The online debate means that everyone can prep together on one big Google Doc, which means that in tournaments with big prep schools and big team prep can consolidate all their efforts onto one Google Doc, whereas small schools won't have the same access to this, and it links back into the argument about increasing the divide between small and big schools. The arguments can also easily be copy-pasted from the internet into a Google document, which means that evidence and cases can either be taken from a back file or the internet, practically reducing a lot of the skill within prep. Third is culture. Subpoint A is that online debate becomes tedious and there are little to no interactions with your close friends, even if they go to the same school as you, because you're typically debating from home, or even if it's more recent, you're not interacting with people from other schools. Second, there's no place for networking. This is the argument I was referring to from before. I have not made a single friend on the circuit since 10th grade when it was in person, because I've not had the ability to really communicate with anybody outside of round, and even still have no chance to just talk to these people and just see who they are as people in general, besides just like people I debate in general. The fourth argument is going to be that of dropout. This year, I was the president of EVSD or Evergreen Valley Speech and Debate, and I watched a number of members of our team stop competing because they got sick of online debate. We did it ever since COVID hit in 10th grade. We did it a little bit, and then in 11th grade, people really tried hard for as long as they could, and then everybody ended up dropping out. There's a reason why Anish and I are the only team competing here at TOC. We have so many talented debaters at our school that just simply did not want to participate anymore, like from Evergreen at least. Well, like my partner specifically stopped participating in debate. That's why I'm partnering with Anish right now. We literally he did not want to do debate anymore because of how the culture was and how it was set up. Fifth is timing. For certain tournaments, we need to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning in order for us to compete instead of us debating when we're actually fresh. That means that we're not getting the same educational or fairness out of these rounds because we're literally not in the right headspace while we're debating. Nobody wants to debate when they're not having a good time or they're not learning something. The implications is that 1, online debate creates smaller and a more toxic environment. 2 reasons. Without face-to-face interactions and networking, people after I'm done with the implications, I'll answer that. Sorry. Without face-to-face interactions and networking, people in the circuit never get a chance to interact with different debaters from different schools and share their perspectives. Second, the circuit is continuously shrinking as a majority of debaters will continue to drop out due to the lack of interaction because of online debate. But also, the second argument here on implications is fairness in education. 2 arguments. First is education. Education decreases since you do not education decreases since you do not need to be well versed in the topic. Rather, just during prep, you can rely on backfiles to supplement your case, and Google can be used as well. And while your opponents read their case to find refutations, which is probably going to decrease the amount of topic education you're actually getting, but also the portable skills like generating analytical thinking or thinking on your feet. Second is fairness. Small schools get skewed by big schools with more resources and more coaching and more members because they can prep more and they be less reliant on themselves and more reliant on people.
Yeah, so my question was for timing, how does timing of having to wake up early change or is unique to in-person versus online debates?
Like when I debated at Yale, I had to be up at 4 a.m. in the morning, as opposed to if I debate within my state, I probably wake up at around 7. So it's different, I think, at least in my case, because I typically don't want to debate when it's 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm more of a night person. Contention 2 is in debate is better. In-person debate is better. Our first argument here, uniqueness point, is fondest memories. This is practically just going to be a lot of anecdotes. Our first one is getting to go down the street and talk, getting to walk down the street and talk with your friends and get food after rounds, and you're sharing what happened in those rounds and bonding with your friends in person were some of the best moments of my high school career. A second one is that the first time that I qualified to the Tournament of Champions and Anish did as well, as we exited the door, the entirety of the team rushed in to give us all a big hug. Things like this don't happen during online debate. We often found ourselves debating because we had to, not because we wanted to. So, the next argument here is I remember watching rounds at NPDI, and for everybody from every school would cram into those rooms, and you get to talk to somebody new, and then they'd introduce them to you'd introduce them to your friends and vice versa. And that's a really cool way for you to network. Nothing will ever beat that feeling of being in the same room and spectating everything in person. A good analogy that you can draw to this is watching a virtual concert versus attending the concert in person. If everybody had this logic that it's better when you're in online, then you wouldn't go into these things and actually get to experience them for themselves. It's the same reason why you can look at pictures of different areas across the world as opposed to actually attending them. It's always better to be in person for this case. Second, the second uniqueness argument is going to be that of skills. There are no more copy pasting. People understand the words and nobody can look anything up. The implications of this. First is the model of the debate. The model of debate that should be used post-COVID is should be in person, because the amount of memories that we've created and the amount of fun that we have and the amount that we've learned was significantly more when it was in person. Second is networking and friendships. I want all the future members of debate, and Anish and I both want them to enjoy each other's company and connect with one another, become friends, even outside of debate, so they can actually get a lot of stuff done. With that, let's move to my opponent's case. At the top, my opponents talk about tournament costs. They say that when you have to rent out the school and you do a lot of things like that, you increase the prices because you have to rent out some stuff. I've run tournaments before, and we typically don't increase the prices to supplement our own costs because we want to be equitable to everybody. And I think that's a norm on the circuit. But also, if what they're saying is true, it costs money to rent NSCA campus rooms. And also to hire judges. So the same logic applies either way, because whenever you run a tournament, there's still the profit incentive. So this argument is really non-unique. Then they say when you rent out the school, most schools allow people to attend even if they don't come. I know that a lot of schools, we specifically have received emails, and I've heard other people also get emails saying that we can't participate because we don't have the funds to. We're a small school, and we typically let them compete anyways because that's just things that we do on the circuit. Second, in terms of transportation, our opponents say that a lot of people have to spend a lot of money. The issue is that there are a number of tournaments within the state as well. Even though our opponents are referring to things like gas and things like that being spent, there are a number of expenses that need to be used either way. Like our opponents state, there's an increase in Wi-Fi connection. There's having a good laptop. Typically, a lot of these tournaments also mandate you have a good camera, which means that you probably also have there are rules saying that you have to have your camera on at a lot of tournaments. So you need to have the good things like that as well. It's a lot more expensive, especially for people that can't afford the technology to begin with. Then they make arguments about formal wear, suits and blazers. We typically, Anisha and I still wore formal clothing, but it's always dependent on the judges and what the judges typically say. Because it's online and we typically have like flow judges, especially for like TOC, we're able to like wear things like this as opposed to a polo or anything like that. But also, let's like take a look at this. At NPDI, I wore a hoodie because I knew it was flow, but at SCU, because I know that it's primarily parent judges, I'm going to be wearing a suit. And in general, you have to have your camera on. So people tend to do this either way. Anisha and I did. I know a lot of other schools did as well. Most of those arguments answer the link arguments because we tell you that they're inevitable. They happen either way. And so that answers that. The growth of debate. Our opponents make arguments about the newcomers of debate being less willing to commit, and they don't want to do being more willing to commit because it seems like a smaller time commitment. We argue the opposite. People within are going to drop out because they're going to realize how tedious and boring it becomes after time. It's not fun at all. Our opponents also make arguments about equity, and we agree that this is a very pressing issue. But remember, we can also use anonymous forms in person, which means that this isn't essentially non-unique because people can still follow those things on their phone and still maintain their privacy. They don't have to speak out publicly. We also have equity forums in person where we're able to all talk and really connect. Those speak to us a lot louder than people just being on screen. So we appreciate equity. We really believe that it's a huge issue, and we believe that online debate can still tackle all these same problems. So for in-person debate will tackle all these problems. For all these reasons, we are very proud to negate. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Renee. I'm going to be the second speaker in this round, or on the affirmation. Wait, what's my order? You say
Overview, nega.
Okay. I'm going to be doing an overview, then I'm going to go on the negations case, and then I'll go to the affirmations case. If everyone is ready, my time of 8 minutes. Sorry. We'll begin now. So let's start with the overview. My partner, and I have actually spent most of our debate career online rather than in person. And while we have missed some of the aspects of being in person, online debate is a very highly accessible, and my opponents have conceded this. And because they've conceded this, they are conceding the value of this round, right? The value is accessibility. So whichever team is providing that in this round is the one you're needing to be voting on. Now let's go to their first contention on online debate being bad. They argue that backfiles is going to make debate less educational, but we argue that it goes both ways. Right? If everyone in a round uses back files, me and my opponents, then everyone is put back on the same level, which means that everyone is going to be like they can still use their same educational skills. Then they argue that like it's not going to be leading to real world skills, but in the real world, people have access to the internet. They have access to back files. When you get a real job in the real world, you don't have like you're not living in a vacuum, so you can it's actually setting us up for real world. Then they say that people can just search up their responses, but we argue that these things were happening in the pre-COVID world. People had laptops at tournaments, and even if this is true, we saw an increase in the number of small schools who were able to access West Coast tournaments after online debate was implemented. So there's actually more equality and more ability for people to debate in our world. On their second argument, they talk about prep and how prep is being skewed because people can debate together or prep together. But we argue that the morals of online debate, right now, schools from last year's tournaments created a big contract for no coach to prep the teams if the other school didn't have a coach because they knew that it was unfair. So we can see that there are actual adaptations being made. Third, culture. They argue that there's hard to interact and make friends, but we argue that almost our entire debate careers have been made in person, and we've made way more friends online than we have in person. And actually, let's turn this argument against them, because being online forces people to branch out. It forces them to actually find new friends, which is key to skills in the real world. And the real world is adapted to this online setting. So when we go into the workplace, we are going to have to find coworkers online, and it's going to be the same. So let's go to their fourth argument. They say that their friends have left the activity, but overall, judges, the debate space hasn't collapsed over the 2 years that we've been in the COVID-19 pandemic. Just because your couple of friends have left doesn't mean that all of them are. My debate team actually grew, and so did Irvington. So it's very dependent on what school you're going to. In general, my opponents have basically zero statistics on how debaters in general are leaving debate. There have been relatively the same amount of people, if not more, joining online debate. Now, thirdly, entering the debate space and staying inside the debate space are very equally important, right? If a novice debater who doesn't know the cost or commitment of being in an in-person tournament joins, they're more likely to leave after finding out how many hundreds of dollars are going to spend. We are the ones who are relieving them of those burdens and allowing them to stay in the activity. So really, more people are going to be joining. Now, they talk about timing and how we have to wake up at 5 a.m. and it's less accessible. We want to turn this argument against them. You have to wake up early earlier when you're in person because you have to factor in the time that it takes to get your transportation and drive to the venue. And also, my opponent said that this is like Yale was like they went to a Yale tournament and that's why they had to wake up at 5 a.m. But Yale is obviously an East Coast tournament. No one is forcing them to go to these tournaments. And how many tournaments are people from the West Coast going towards East Coast tournaments? And finally, the fact that they have even the opportunity to attend an East Coast tournament is proof of more accessibility in our world, right? They would have to buy plane tickets to go to Yale if they wanted to compete in person, but we've given them the opportunity to do it more accessibly online. They say that the circuit is shrinking because of whatever reasons, people leaving the activity, but really this circuit is growing because the cost to barrier to entry, the money they have to pay to a tournament is gone. It's lower. There's less money they have to spend on clothing, on transportation, all these other things. That has gone conceded. And then finally, they said that education decreases because of these, like all these reasons, but education increases because people know that they have to have a higher threshold for arguments. And let's go into their second contention, where they talk about in-person debate just being better in general. Overall, judges, we can't quantify their personal anecdotes and fond memories, but we can quantify the mental health of students, right? We know that the mental health of students has been improving in our world. They talk about how watching rounds of NPDI, now everyone's cramming into rooms to network, while being crammed into a room to debate with 3 other teams is very chaotic and actually is distracting you, and it's making it harder to access that education that they care about so much. And then they say that like they're making more friends in person, but friendships can still be fostered online. And overall, we've made a ton of friends online debate. My partner has been in debate for 2 years in person and 2 online, and she's made more friends online than in person. So if we're going to use personal anecdotes, hey, everyone has a different story. So let's go to the affirmations case here and extend some of the things that my opponents dropped. Let's go to the first contention where they say that Evergreen doesn't have to like increase the price to rent rooms, and the price to rent NSDA campus is actually very high. But I was the treasurer last year in my debate club, and I actually know that renting an NSDA campus room literally costs dollars to cents compared to the hundreds of dollars you have to pay for an inter-person tournament venue to rent out a whole college or something. Then my opponents say that most schools allow for the tournaments to host the tournament at their school, but we argue that it's great that they can do this, but not every school does this. Not every school has the ability to do so. Now on our transportation point, my opponents say that a lot of people still have to pay for other expenses such as Wi-Fi, laptop, cameras. But first of all, the cost of technology is greatly smaller than the cost of going to and attending tournaments. And then secondly, debaters can go to cafes and public places with free Wi-Fi to debate. And then finally, even if they do need Wi-Fi, they do need technology. They were going to need some sort of technology to prep that 20 minutes in a debate anyway. So they were already going to have laptops. I certainly had a laptop before I entered the debate. Now let's go to their our third argument on formal wear. They say that formal wear depends on the judges, but they concede that people spend less money when they're not having to buy all this fancy clothes and attend in person, and the fact that only the top part of your body is showing. Your pants, you can be wearing pajamas. You don't have to be paying for a full suit. You can just buy a jacket. Now let's go on to the final impacts here. Obviously extend those, and let's go into our second contention of the growth of the debate space. My opponents argue that people within debate will drop out of the activity, but we argue that most of the people in debate right now have barely experienced in-person debate except for us, the seniors. So the majority of people will not drop out. And our second argument here is that online debate has been the norm for 2 years, and debate hasn't collapsed. And this is proof that online tournaments are still beneficial to the competitors. And then finally, people who do not have the opportunity to go to in-person tournaments now do in our world. Thus, we are the ones who control the internal link to accessibility. This is the biggest argument that my opponents are going to be losing out, because at the point where they concede that people are going to join debate in our world, there is no world in which having less debaters is going to be preferable. Finally, they said that equity forums were a better experience based on in person, but really clarifying and filing an equity complaint is very difficult to do in person, and actually causes more anxiety for people and is easier to do online. So finally, let's do a little bit of weighing of both sides and really break down why you should be voting for the affirmation in this round. On probability, the probability of the debate space collapsing is extremely low, because right now we've seen that for 2 years, debate still exists. The magnitude, the amount of debaters who are impacted by debate is higher in our world because we allow marginalized debaters or debaters who do not have the money to pay for all all these expenses such as transportation to join the activity and still reap the benefits. And then finally on time frame, it takes less time to go to tournaments to get that education and to be in this activity in our world, because we do not have all these other things that people have to get, all these hoops to jump through in order to get to a tournament. So for those three reasons, it's quite clear here that our world is going to be preferable, that a post-pandemic world where high school parli tournaments are online is going to be more beneficial, not only for accessibility, but for education and whatever standards that my opponents try to win. So we have access to all of those impacts. And for those reasons, please vote AF. Thank you.
So the order is, I'll start on the neg, I'll go to the AF, I'll do wing at the end. Oh, shoot. My bad. I'm going to do an overview first. Yeah. I'll do an overview, then I'll do neg case, AF case, and then wing. All right. Is everyone good? All right. My time begins now. Let's do an overview of the round. My opponents in their speech, they literally mentioned like the most important thing about like this topic is going to be accessibility, right? I'm going to be telling you two things. First, if we win our argument about small schools versus big schools, we link into accessibility even harder than they do. Because accessibility means that everyone should be able to get the same opportunities and the same education, the same fairness at every single tournament. If we win our argument where we tell you that online debate disproportionately skews out smaller schools, that means that we're winning our link there, like we're winning a link on their like weighing mechanism of accessibility. Let's go to the neg case. Starting the arguments about backfiles, they make one response where they say that if both teams have backfiles, they're on the same levels. Two responses. First, big school versus small schools. It doesn't matter. Both teams can use like backfiles because obviously the bigger school is going to have more backfiles. For example, Nueva has a lot more coaches than like a small East Coast school. So obviously Nueva is going to have a lot more backfiles than any other school. It's common sense. So the second argument we're going to make is that this doesn't mean anything. Just because both teams are using backfiles, it doesn't mean it's good. That just means that both teams are receiving literally no education. If everyone's responses and everyone's speeches and debate are just copy pasted, nobody is actually learning anything. That means that the education that they get from the debate is just gone. They concede this. Next, they talk about laptops at tournaments. Obviously, my opponents don't really remember how online parliamentary or in-person parliamentary debate used to be. You can't bring your laptop into a round. You can't just in the middle of like the 1AC just search up what the app is talking about. That's not how it works. You can only use laptops during prep, which is why we're saying backfiles uniquely online can be used even during the round. It's not only before. Next, go to our second argument about prep. They say that in online debate, schools cleared like a contract to not prep, and there's like adaptations. Adaptations are never going to be better than an actual rule. In person, it's much harder to team prep because everybody needs their own, like you have to write your case on a piece of paper, right? Not everybody can just share one piece of paper. So it's like not as easy for everyone to just contribute to one doc. So the team prep advantage that big schools get is a lot less. And they talk about like this schools being cleared as a big contract between two schools, like not team prep. It still happens at every tournament. I'm pretty sure majority of big schools still do team prep at tournament where it's allowed. Like this probably isn't true. Then like our argument is really simple, right? This argument also links into small schools versus big schools, right? Big schools, when there's multiple coaches, or even if the coaches aren't prepping, if you're at a school where there's 10 entries, that is literally 20 people working out on one Google Doc to make a case, which is obviously going to be a lot better than like a school with 2 entries where there's 4 people working on a case. It's probably not a good idea. Again, this links into their argument of accessibility. There's no point if people can go to tournaments if A, they're not learning anything, and B, if it's unfair. It just doesn't make any sense. Next, go to our argument about culture. They talk about how online forces you to branch out and find new friends. This argument makes literally no sense. I know everybody here, when you were in online school, you did not interact with anybody. When you're online, it is a lot harder to interact with people. And then they make like this argument about mental health. During the pandemic and during online school, I'm pretty sure a lot more people had mental health issues. A lot more people were depressed. They had more anxiety because when you're not having like social interaction, it's really hard to like stay happy and stay positive about things. And then we also tell you it's not really practical to be able to find friends like online. Whereas in person, if you actually are in, like as Shrey mentions, if you're spectating with somebody like from a different school, or even after you debate like somebody, right? You can literally walk out of the room with your opponents. You can have a conversation. But an online debate, that's just not really like incentivized. The fourth argument is that about dropout. They say that we have no stats for dropping out, but there are 2 responses. First, you can look to like University of Kentucky TOC, which is like the TOC for all the other events. They literally, ever since online debate started, they've been loosening their restrictions on the bid requirements. The reason was basically the tournament director realized that not that many people were competing anymore, which means TOC wasn't gonna have that many people. That's why before you used to need 2 silver bids to qualify the public forum TOC. This year you only need 1. And last year they started taking a lot more at-larges because there weren't that many people competing in silver TOC, which probably just shows you that not that many people are competing anymore. But then you can look at NPDL-TOC this year. This year, only 18 teams auto-qualified to TOC. Last year, 38 teams auto-qualified. Obviously, less people qualified to the TOC online. Like every year, less people have just been auto-qualifying. Like the most amount of people who auto-qualified to the TOC was when the last in-person TOC was. So it obviously shows that they keep talking about, oh, there's more accessibility, more people can go to TOC. That's not true. Actually, less people have been able to auto-qualify to TOC than in past years. Next, then they talk about how like novice debaters are going to stay. This argument makes no sense. Specifically, like the problem with online debate is the debate experience becomes about the rounds, less about like the experience talking to people. Everything about online debate is you won the round, you lose the round. There's no more actual interaction, having fun with your friends. There's nothing to remember from an online tournament except whether or not you won or lost, which is why a lot of people have burnout. That's why a lot of the novice members, if they don't do good in the beginning, or if it's just easier to get bored of online debate because it's just about the debating rather than the experience. Next on the argument about timing, like they say you have to wait. Yeah, I'll take it at the end of this argument. Like they'd say that you have to wake up earlier because you have to drive, but like again, in an online tournament, since like for example, like because online tournaments, like there's more tournaments, like for example, NPDL-TOC, they've been increasing the point requirement to qualify, right? That means that at some point you're going to be forced to go to these East Coast tournaments, and because it's online, you can't fly there. You have to get up at 4 a.m. But like that doesn't really matter. Let's go to like our bigger impacts, right? Our implication is really simple. First, you want to extend our impact about a smaller and more toxic circuit. We specifically tell you with no face-to-face interaction, there's no networking. People in the circuit never get a chance to interact. But the second impact, which is going to be huge, is fairness and education. Education is going to be really important, and we would say that it probably outweighs there are like weighing mechanism accessibility for a couple of reasons. First, if there is no education in debate, there is literally no point of people accessing it. The only reason it's important for people to access the debate space is because it can help them learn and grow. If debate just doesn't become educational because people are just copy pasting things and the team that win is just the team who comes from the bigger school, it doesn't matter if people can access debate if it's unfair and it's uneducational. Okay. Is that good? Yeah. So then like on our contention about fondest memories, like we would just say like, again, you can get more memories from like in-person debate. It's just better. It's more retention rate because it's fun and you can just have a better time. Yeah. And then also like they say cramming into rooms is bad for education and fairness. They literally said that like if you don't have access to Wi-Fi, you have to go to a public coffee shop to debate. I'm pretty sure that's not like a better alternative. Okay. Let's quickly go to the AF case. Start on contention 1 about like tournament costs. They just say that like NSDA is cheaper. First of all, like a couple of responses. Most tournaments are run by the high schools. Oh yeah, sorry. I'll take your PI just quickly.
Oh yeah, right now. Okay, cool. So just like before I ask this actual question, you two are seniors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, if you think online debate is so bad compared to in-person debate, why did you stick with online debate?
We have to set an example for our school.
We want like if we quit debate, then like our club is going to collapse, right? It's pretty simple. We don't have a choice.
So you only stayed with online debate to help your school.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We said that in our case.
Yeah. Well, I need to move on. Yeah. Okay. Go to this argument about tournament costs. They talk about renting rooms. The key observation you want to make is the people who are running tournaments are literally the school. Like when we have a tournament at like Evergreen Valley High School, you don't have to rent out the high school. The costs are going to be like operating costs and different stuff. Then go to this argument about like transportation. They say like people spend less money on fancy clothes. We just say cameras have to be on. People are incentivized to like spend money on it anyway. Like if there's a public perception that comes from judges like on students who are wearing like dress shirts or like blazers, that's going to be there.
You have to pay the cost for good Wi-Fi and cameras.
Yeah. And then also you want to extend the arguments that like even if the tournament is online, it then means that you have to now have access to a laptop. You also need really good Wi-Fi. You need a bunch of different things like a good camera. Okay. Okay. Go to their last contention about the growth of debate. Again, this argument is they just talk about how online debate hasn't like collapsed. Okay. The key arguments, like we've already given you statistics that debate has been shrinking, but also we're literally saying that if education goes down on net and online debate keeps continuing, it's probably at some point going to continuously shrink and collapse. 2 years isn't enough time for such a big activity to collapse. So we've seen that it's slowly getting smaller, which probably means on net, if debate as a whole, if we can prove to you that it shrinks, it means less people can access it if the debate space doesn't even exist in the first place. So for all those reasons, I strongly urge a neg ballot.
there? All right, can everybody hear me? Cool. So the order of the speech is going to be education, fairness, and I'll be answering accessibility as I'm going. They're going to be weighing arguments, but I'll signpost, but you can most likely flow this on a new sheet. It's probably just going to summarize everything. Everybody good? We'll give you a second to get out a new sheet if you need it. All right. Okay. With that, my time may begin now. Education is the most important argument in today's round, and Nisha does a very good job isolating why this is the case. If there's no education to be gained from the round because everybody is using backfalls or using some method to not actually absorb the education that they should be, there is no need to even participate in debate because you're not building those skills like analytical things and analytical skills and thinking on your feet, which means that there's no need to participate in the activity altogether. That means that education is the most important impact in today's round because if there's no need for us to even gain the education from the round, there's no need for us to even do that in the first place. That answers accessibility. On fairness as well. Remember, judges, they have conceded the fact that they tell you that it's fine because when we have backfalls, there's going to be an even amount of people, but both people are using backfalls. But the problem is they have conceded our argument about the fact that big schools that have a lot of coaches are going to be able to prep that a lot more. There are two ways that they do this. Because it's online, they have the ability to speak to them directly and help out. And they can also consolidate everything onto one doc as opposed to everybody writing it down on their own sheets, which means that it is inherently a lot more problematic and a lot more team prep and a bigger gap between the small schools and big schools in a world with online debate. With that, there's no need for you to debate if you're just going to get blown out of the water. And Nisha does a good job telling you that there's going to be 20 people versus 4 people prepping. Who's going to win? Probably the people with 20 people. Yeah.
Just extend the argument about how big school versus small school links in.
I'm getting there. All right, because we have now isolated the fact that fairness fairness is an incredibly important voter, that's going to link into the accessibility argument as well. Because if we can prove to you that small schools are actually being harmed in the process versus big schools because of online debate, and they're deliberately being harmed more because people can consolidate everything onto these like technological platforms, then that just proves that it links into accessibility more, because that means that there's no need, it's harder for people to access the education. It's harder for people to actually gain anything from the round if they're just going to lose and they're not going to be able to compete on the same level anyway to begin with. That answers both of the claims. So now let's just answer the general accessibility arguments that our opponents make. It's just cost, transportation, and formal wear, and then I guess like some other stuff. Here's the problem. Every single thing that they talk about gets offset with the fact that they have to pay for a good camera, which is mandated to be turned on at almost every single tournament, and also the cost of Wi-Fi. Both of those things are just as expensive, if not more, than anything that my opponents talk about, which means that because they're attending a number of tournaments throughout the year, the cost of things like formal clothing, the cost of gas, all those things are nothing when they have to compare to a big purchase in a technological platform, but then also the cost of stable Wi-Fi. They give you arguments saying that you can go to a coffee shop and debate there or a library. That makes no sense. It is literally impossible to focus with all those people there that are not even doing the same debate activity as you. Our opponents make the claim that in general, like having people in the same room as you for like other stuff, like when you're spectating rounds is also distracting, but all those people are being quiet while you're talking. So that doesn't mean the same thing if they try to like bring that up in the next speech. So clarifying everything in this debate, how you should probably break this down in terms of your ballot. You should look to education first. When you go to education, the place that you're probably going to want to sign your ballot is on backfiles, because they only read one argument in response to this. Is just telling you that, actually, no, they read two. They first say that it's on the same level, which I already answered, and then they say that there are laptops at the tournament. No, there aren't. You can't look anything up. In-person debate, you are not allowed to take a laptop in. Given that this argument is conceded, we're probably going to be collapsing here on backfiles and also on prep. These two arguments are very key. I've answered every single argument with this. So the collapse strat is pretty simple. What we're going to say is that education matters the most in this round. If we can prove to you that because there's this gigantic divide between these big and small schools, there's no need for you to compete in the first place. And given that that's the case, then there's no need for you to participate, which means that it's a prerequisite to accessibility. Yeah, it is a prerequisite to accessibility, because in a world where you're no longer able to access any of the benefits from this, any of the good stuff from debate, it's going to be like trumping anything that they say there as well. Really quickly, if they try to go over these arguments that like there's a lot of costs associated with it, oh, you're able to attend more tournaments, like, oh, you were able to attend Yale. The quality of the debate is inherently worse because of online debate and the reasons we isolated above. But also, when you're really tired and groggy, there's no need for you to debate because you're practically not in a good state. You're not taking anything away from it. Your ballot should break down simply. You should vote off of education for the neg. If you don't do that, you go to the fairness level. Fairness indicts their arguments about accessibility just like education does. And even if you get to the accessibility claim, any argument that they make about cost and being able to attend is offset by the cost of having a good computer, a good laptop, or a stable Wi-Fi source. There's literally no offense for the AF. Go neg.
All right, cool. So this is the last affirmative speech of the debate. And the order is actually, so for this speech, I recommend you get out a new piece of paper because I'm going to be going over a lot. The order for this speech is I'm going to be doing an overview, voters for the aff, non-voters for the neg, then a lot of weighing. Cool. Okay. If everybody's ready, then my time will begin now. My opponents concede from the PMC that the most important thing that we're going to be looking at in this debate is about who has the better access to accessibility. You're going to be voting on who gets the most amount of people into debate at the end of the day and the most number of debaters. The problem is they think they did a good enough job to addressing education and fairness in their block to win for this. The problem is they don't, and I'm going to explain exactly why. First, on the voter level, we're going to be going for two major voters in this round. The first is accessibility, and the second one is mental health. On accessibility, specifically on the cost contention, there's two things that go conceded. First, on the cost of flying or transporting all the way across the United States for East Coasters to come to tournaments such as the TOC, this argument goes conceded from the very first speech. They fundamentally drop it. What the cost of taking a plane flight versus your problem of waking up a couple hours earlier to go to an East Coast tournament is completely they're worlds apart. In addition, the cost of tournament rooms, which Renee brings up that she was the treasurer for, goes completely conceded. It costs money to rent out multiple rooms, whereas it doesn't cost as much to rent it out in NSCA campus. What does this mean? This basically means it costs more to attend tournaments and more to host tournaments, which means schools cannot host these tournaments and debaters cannot attend these tournaments in the first place. There is no point in them trying to go to debate, and then there's no point in them joining debate if they can't even go to these tournaments that they want to go so bad. They try to offset this by saying oh, you have to buy a laptop and a camera and Wi-Fi. But the problem is, first, you already need a laptop in person. Even if you don't use it during round, you still need it to prep for the debate. And second of all, the cost of a Wi-Fi or camera is nothing compared to a plane flight. We see East Coast debaters now. We don't see them then, and everybody still has the same access to this Wi-Fi or camera. It isn't as big of a problem as they think. The second reason you're voting for the affirmative is on the mental health contention, which gets fundamentally conceded the majority of it. Two warrants here. The first is that comfortable clothes leads to better mental health, at the point where we tell you multiple studies show that comfortability leads to better argumentation and better warranting and better mental health, less depression overall. And secondly, the equity forums violent, which goes conceded, which says that if students want to file an equity complaint, they are less likely to do it in person because they're too scared of getting judged. This